Welcome. I know some of you. Has anyone been to my talks on the ketogenic diet before? Last year and a half ago? Okay. There is going to be volleyball starting up. I apologize if it gets a little bit loud, but I think it will be fine when we shut these. So, basically a couple of years ago I was introduced in a different sort of way to the ketogenic diet. Different in that it seems something that could be approachable for a lot of people and have a lot of applications to everything from certain diseases to some common problems that I deal with all the time. The other part of it was that I actually started to do it myself, and that's something that I guess as a naturopathic doctor I've tried to never ask anyone to do something that I wasn't willing to do myself, and so I embarked on that about a year and a half ago. And it started a process that, in changing my own health and the way I approach nutrition and diet, it started to really click and offer, I think, a lot for others. So some of you who've been coming to me have seen me, you've probably heard me talk about it. So I want to go through some of the basics of the diet, but really back up and start with kind of the origins of where this even came from. Hopefully. Here we go. So I'll go through some conventional thinking about nutrition and diet. You know, as soon as I start talking about a high-fat diet, a lot of people, you know, your head starts to spin a little bit, and you think, well, wait a minute. We've been told for quite a while that, you know, fat is bad, causes cardiovascular disease, it's high in calories, it's fattening. So a few things here on conventional thinking. So we talk about, you know, carbohydrates is the primary fuel source for a lot of animals and humans, primates. We burn carbohydrates by turning it into glucose as sugar, and that produces energy in the body. And because I'm on a ketogenic diet, I get warm, which is another thing we'll talk about. Hot flashes. No, it's basically that carbs, you know, are our primary energy source, and so as we've evolved and grown up on this planet, we have always sought more and more density in terms of carbohydrates because it's a fuel that can be efficiently utilized for energy. So we're told fat is bad, of course, causes disease and obesity. Saturated fat especially is bad, clogs arteries. Cholesterol is not good. The 9 kcal there per gram just stands for that just a little note for me to talk about how fat is very dense in calories. So that is true. It's over double by weight the amount of calories in fatty foods as there is to carbohydrates and protein. Another line of thought is that salt is bad for us, and you're starting to see really over the last probably decade that high protein diets have sort of caught on. We're saying, you know, let's reduce carbs, low carb is good, you know, eating low carb is better, and let's use protein to offset that, because yes, you can have too much carbohydrates and you'll see that there's some benefits from a higher protein diet, but I'll explain also why that's not such a good thing. So, and then this mantra about weight loss that, well, we just need to eat less and we need to work out more. If that was true, then all these gymnasiums, you know, these gyms that people go to would be full of fit people. And I've known people personally who've been very diligent, work out very, very hard, and their weight has not shifted, and they're actually controlling calories quite a bit. So that also is not really accurate. So when we look at physiology in humans, we often assign everything to our genetics. You know, we got bad genes. We just had the luck of the draw. And, you know, we look at physique, you know, what's the difference? You know, why does somebody go to the gym and get pumped up and other people struggle? Well, some of it has to do with genetics, yes, for sure. But as it turns out, our genes are turned on or turned off based on even how our parents ate, how we ate as children, and how we were brought up, and then how we eat as adults. The good news is that even as adults, if we've inherited a lot of either bad habits or some bad genetics, but really it's how do we turn off the bad genes and turn on the good ones. And the truth is a lot has to do with the environment that we surround ourselves. We know that even emotional stress will activate certain genes, and we will retain and store fat more readily when we're under a lot of stress. And stress can be part of our diet that we eat as well. I don't know if this percentage is correct, but I saw this on Facebook a long time ago, and it stuck with me. And it's pretty true in principle that exercise, but again, this is that mantra about diet and calories and exercise, but it's true that diet is predominantly the issue when it comes to calories and body physique and optimizing the body. But then the question is, what kind of diet? Because you can eat the same calories in different diets, and you can have very different results depending on the makeup of that diet. But exercise, you cannot work yourself out enough to be able to get, this perfect health that people want. And I'll tell you about my story a little bit here. So both diet and stress-induced hormone imbalance. So what is it if it's not just working out and diet? Well, as it turns out, the dietary choices induce stress, but also our emotional stress, lack of sleep. We always hear about stress. It basically throws off our metabolism over time to a point where you could eat a very low-calorie diet and still not lose weight if that system is broken. That broken metabolism really results in, it's like having a car that won't operate properly. You fill it up with gas, you might even change the oil, but there's something wrong with the mechanics of the engine actually working and burning the fuels efficiently. A couple of things like insulin resistance, hypothyroidism, and adrenal fatigue are imbalances within that hormone system that kind of lock things up. By the way, I'm going to try to talk not very long here so we can talk questions and answers, because I don't like talking at people very much. So let's go through some metabolic truth. The body is actually designed to burn two different fuel sources. Analogy is not perfect, but the hybrid cars that have come out where you have them able to burn gas or run on a battery is kind of a good analogy. It depends on, for our survival, we've adapted to be able to use both carbs and fats. And I use these pictures to kind of describe the two different fuel sources. Carbohydrates are very readily available, quick fuel, very volatile and fast. You use it up very quickly. Fats, on the other hand, are a slow burn, so like that candle there. They both generate energy and heat and get things done, get work done, but they have very different effects in the body. So feast or famine, that refers to basically our bodies were designed that in times of feasting, that meant usually more carbohydrates. And in the context of eating more carbohydrates, our bodies are designed to store fat. So as long as your diet is predominantly higher in carbohydrates, you will store energy. And yes, you'll have more energy. So people that are very active and athletes and the people we sort of envy sometimes because they can go eat whatever they want, supposedly, they might for now have just better metabolism. Eventually it'll catch up to them in other ways. But carbohydrates are quick energy, so athletes, we talk about carbo loading. We use energy shakes and stuff like that. They're usually full of sugar and full of caffeine, and you get that quick shot of energy. Fats, on the other hand, are slower to burn. What's cool is that we can use different kinds of fats, though, for quicker energy without the side effects of sugar, carbohydrates. So I went through all this, some of it. So quick energy for carbs, they require a lot more hormone control systems working. That's the pancreas and your adrenal cortisol level, for instance. It increases adrenal stress, and you can't quite see it there, but it's inflammation. And that's because when we burn glucose as fuel, we need more oxygen. And in that process, we generate more free radicals and the potential for damaging some of the tissues of the body. And it's all about balance, as I'll talk about as well. Any excess carbohydrates, though, very clearly get stored as fat. And in our culture where calories are very, very plentiful, it's very easy to get excess carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are also highly addictive, and that's a physiologic fact. The brain of human beings are designed to seek and destroy carbohydrates because it meant longer survival in terms of the famine coming or whatever, long cold winter when we didn't have trains and planes and shipping food all over the world. We'd be living off fat right now. So on the other hand, fat actually makes you thin, as it turns out. Hopefully that's going to be a takeaway message when we're done today. That it's burned slowly, It gives you much more sustained energy. A lot of this isn't controversial, but it's, for some reason, we kind of go from these messages to the dietary advice that's given is not quite right. So, but yeah, per unit, yes, it's more calorie dense, but per unit of fat, you get more energy from it. So what ends up happening is you actually need less calories in to get the same amount of more energy. Oxidative stress, that's like, it's the exhaust, that picture of that rocket taking off. I mean, you're burning, there's just tons of CO2 and pollutants and all that being given off. When we burn sugar in our body, we produce a lot of excess, at least more free radicals than we do when we burn fat. Glycogen versus triglycerides. So a little technical here, but if we took an example of 2,000 calories, which is a typical intake, say, for an average adult, glycogen in storage in our body is basically the quick form of glucose that's stored in muscle and the liver primarily. So for instance, at night, when you don't eat and you need glucose to run your body, you release it from stored locations. It's in the form of glycogen. So you have about, 2,000 calories of stored glycogen. So that's about a day's worth. So if you got up one day and decided you weren't going to eat for that day, you can go the whole day. And usually fasting for a day is not that difficult for a lot of people. So that's mostly glycogen being released from your muscles. So glycogen's turned into glucose and it continues to run your body. On the other hand, we also have stored fat, so that's the triglycerides. And the average smaller adult, about 40,000 calories are stored in the form of fat. That's, 2,000 calories a day, that's about 20 days, all the way up to 80,000 calories up to 40 days. So essentially, when people do these long-term fasts, to fast for 40 days, people do that, have done that, you're living off your own fat stores. As it turns out, our bodies were designed to actually be fasting part of the year. That's whether it was a necessity or because of some religious practice, but it's a very therapeutic thing to do. It's something I've tried to do a few times, and I never got past 2 to 3 days before I got very sick and stopped the fast. And I'll talk about what that is too. So when you eat fat, it makes you feel fuller and more satisfied. Instead of driving you to eat more, usually if you're eating something high fat, you're not going to eat quite as much as your body gets used to doing that. So let me also go through some history here. So I'm going to talk about the Eskimos and the Inuits and some African tribes, and I'll just do this briefly. And then also what the keto diet has been used for a very long period of time prior to modern day here. So Eskimos, what are they? We often think of like the paleo diet, and we think about different cultures that survive on predominantly animal protein. Well, as it turns out, we have some records, and there was an interesting a physician, this Dr. Schwaka, traveled in the 1800s there with Inuits or Eskimos to try to locate a lost expedition, essentially, that had disappeared. They ended up spending time with these peoples, and they noticed that they only ate basically animal product and protein and fat for months on end through the winter. So through this entire expedition and search, they survived. They used up all their Western food they had brought. It only lasts probably a few weeks, grains and stored fruits and things that they could carry. And when that was gone, all of the white people, the Europeans, they started to eat the Eskimo food, and they actually got very sick. And they thought, we're over, this is done. And about a week to 2 weeks into that, they didn't die, they survived and actually began to thrive. This is something that has now been described as the keto flu. This is when the body's adapting to burn fat, or like when I tried to do a fast for 3 days and I got violently sick. This is because my body didn't know how to burn fat because I had been eating carbohydrates every day for 365 days a year since the day I was born, mostly. So once your body adapts through that keto flu, though, you start to thrive. You can actually burn the fats and eat fat. So again, you have all those calories stored, and you can eat higher fat foods and keep your body in that ketogenic state. That's a matter of necessity. We're not probably all going to go on an Arctic expedition, but as it turns out, there's some health benefits. So, Inuit diet or the Eskimo diet basically is predominantly, depends on the season, but it's a lot of reindeer meat, and there's seal and some hunted animals. I don't know if you guys see this chart, but essentially the fat is that greenish blue, 77% of calories, protein's there at 21%, and the carbs is at 2%. That's essentially a ketogenic diet, burning fats instead of carbohydrates. Some of the foods they ate: sardines, venison, deer, animal fat, and seaweed, interestingly, there at the bottom, which is, often it's, well, what about berries and vitamin C and all these vitamins that we get from fruits and other vegetables? Well, they did have a season, so there was some vegetables available parts of the year, but the animals they survived on ate, either they were sea animals and they had diets that they got those nutrients from. Even these meats, it doesn't show it on this table, but meat, it does have vitamin C in it. It has stored glycogen as well, interestingly. So we're never talking about a completely carb-free diet, and you really aren't going to see the nutritional deficiencies if we pay attention to at least eating balanced when we're in this mode. This was just a slide about the ketogenic flu. So again, about 2 to 3 weeks passed, and these guys were thriving. So these guys, the Maasai, if I'm saying that right, in Kenya and Tanzania, they're actually, this is a modern day photo actually, it's they still exist predominantly on their traditional diet. And they essentially, it's fairly ketogenic. They raise animals, they have meat, they have milk, but they have dairy products and meat that's much higher in fat. They also consume blood of the animals, which is interesting because it's a main sodium or salt supply for them. So 60 to 70% of calories are from fat, and it kind of raises this sort of contradiction that, for instance, the French, they have a very high fat diet as well, and yet they have very low disease rates. High in saturated fat, high in cholesterol, and what you see, essentially they don't have obesity there. They're hunters, they call these guys warriors. Essentially they're protecting their livestock from wild animals. They don't really have to hunt per se, so it's not like they're having to run around. They're probably a little more active than some of us. So let's see. So a quick few slides about modern studies where they looked at low carbohydrate diets, therefore high fat diets, and its effect on cardiovascular disease markers. So the VLCKD column, that's the very low carbohydrate, ketogenic, and then the low fat diet is more of a traditional American Heart Association, the Ornish diet, and kind of what modern recommendations typically involve. The main number I want you to see is triglyceride level, which is blood fats. On a high-fat diet, your blood fats went down 51%. A lot of people with high carbohydrate-rich diets end up with a lot of high triglycerides and fatty liver syndrome, for instance. Again, carbohydrates, they're all being converted to fat. But when you eat fat, you actually begin to burn more fat and your blood levels go down. The low-fat diet did help too. A lot of that, there's some health benefits of a low-fat diet, and there's something there, I think, seasonally that I could talk about. I won't talk a lot about that today. There's nothing really wrong with a carbohydrate-rich diet if it's kind of in context and seasonally addressed, in my opinion. This one's weight loss, so they compared a low-fat diet to a high-fat diet. Here's weight loss by time. Calories were about the same, but you'll see the black dots there. Again, that's the high-fat diet, and then here's the low-fat diet. And I mean, there's no question where more weight loss occurred below that line there. This one's my favorite because when it comes to your body physique, I mean, we all want to look a certain way and perhaps feel a certain way, but when it comes to actual lifespan and quality of life, a lot of what's happening in our bodies is invisible, and we hear the term inflammation talked about a lot. Cardiovascular disease is predominantly a disease of inflammation. So this is when your immune system is reacting to some irritant. It then starts to damage your vessels and your heart and circulation. That's what leads to blockages as your body's developing basically these lesions in your vascular system. So this is the study again that was looking at these two different diets, and those red lines all represent reduced inflammation when they're below the 0 line, so percent change down to here, 35% on some of these. These are immune markers for inflammation, essentially. So the red are the very high fat diet, the low carbohydrate rich diet. You can see the dramatic change, whereas the low fat diet, well, it didn't really, it either stayed neutral or they actually went up. So in terms of disease risk, and this is relevant to things like cancer, degenerative joint disease, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, they all are higher or more at risk when our inflammation is higher. So this slide, I'm going to talk about this one. This one was just showing the percent change in triglycerides. I kind of already talked about that. You can see that it dropped more dramatically with the low-carb diet. This pyramid, this is the standard recommended dietary intake for Americans at least. It's got the carbs on the bottom. Of course, that's your base. It's supposed to be plentiful. And then you go up and here's fats. Way up at the top. Of course, sugars and fats, they kind of lump them. And then of course we've got the fruits and meats and stuff. There's a lot of a lot of people don't like this diet now. This plan has been it's been disregarded quite a bit. But as a comparison, so the ketogenic diet food list actually flips that upside down, although we do get rid of the sugar predominantly. But you can see the fattier meats, you've got the oils, the fat-rich foods down at the bottom, and then some of the higher carb foods up at the top can be added in there. So I'll talk about my story a little bit. The only reason I began to explore the ketogenic diet was because I was given something called exogenous ketones. When we burn fat, we produce ketones. Ketones are the burning currency, that's what we metabolize into our cells as energy when we burn fat. So we're talking ketones are a good thing in this context. If some of you have heard of acidosis or diabetic ketoacidosis, that's a bad thing. That's a completely different thing. I won't even talk about it, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about nutritionally burning fat. It's only been a couple of years available, but when you take ketones, what it does is it sort of jump-starts those engines in your body to burn fat. So if you wanted to fast, you could actually start taking these, and you could probably skip most of that ketogenic flu. I haven't gone 3 days, but I've gone 24 hours, and that's not a good experiment, but I've read the people who have done fasts, and usually once you're on the ketogenic diet, you can fast fairly easily if your schedule allows for that sort of thing, and there's some benefits to it. So it jumpstarts that fat burning, and then it begins to help your body metabolize and burn its own fat. So it prevents the ketogenic flu, it prevents carb withdrawals, at least to a large extent. In and of itself, you could walk out of here and never do the keto diet, and the ketones can help. That's not what I recommend, because I believe that long-term health is going to be based on our dietary choices as well. But it definitely reduces, it's very clear that it reduces inflammation, improves brain function. A lot of the diseases they've treated using the ketogenic diet, we can see some of the benefits just by taking the ketones. Now, fats in your diet, you can turn into ketones once your body gets used to doing that. And so just a few things I'll go through. Saturated fats are the preferred source, by the way. Ironically, it's supposed to be bad, but it's the preferred source of energy to break down. So versus down at the bottom, I have polyunsaturated. That's like fish oil. There's nothing wrong with that. It produces health benefits. It's anti-inflammatory, but we don't burn that as energy predominantly. It's saturated fat. So we see that in animal meats. We see it in coconut and palm, and also monounsaturated. Saturated are also excellent fuel sources. So that's the olive oil, sunflower, safflower, avocado, and nuts. The keto diet itself, I'll just kind of scan through these percentages. This is where, we're kind of like, maybe get a little dizzy by the numbers. And how do we track this? Well, that's what we'll talk about too at the end here. But essentially it's 75 to 80% of your calories from fat. That's, I used an average of a 2,000 calorie diet. That equates to 178 grams of fat on average. And then carbs, 5 to 10%. There's a range on that, on fat and carbs. It depends on the individual. So the 50 to 25 grams, so that's a very small amount. One slice of bread, for instance, typically about 25 grams of carbohydrates, one normal size piece of bread. And protein's about 15% of calories, about 75 grams. So in a lot of diets, that's kind of on the low side. Definitely not a high protein diet. Here's these examples. This is, I don't know these people individually, personally, but these are people doing ketogenic diets. So it does work relatively quickly, but again, it depends on some things. And I mentioned at the beginning about hormone health, and I'll address that too as well. So to be successful at this, again, I believe that you need to have some kind of a support system. I mean, there's educating yourself, of course, about the diet. It's changing your pantry around, but you got to learn how to prepare these foods. But I feel like, I could ask everyone to raise their hand who's been on a diet. Most of us have in some form or another. They're usually very hard to stick with. They require that you're doing something that's not something you're going to continue forever. And this actually helps, because you're seeing those benefits right away and you feel better, you can stick with that. Let's see if there's anything. But the tracking, so the hassle about this, and I finally, about a week ago, I started tracking again, and I hate to do that. But I was using Chronometer, finally, after Cheryl told me about it. I've used other apps, and they're okay. We can talk about different ways to track your intake. I didn't track yesterday, but I was doing all week long, and they're a good estimate, but there's a lot of possibilities for error in there, but it gives you a starting point. But it's really essential. But I found that this diet just started to, it was a snowball effect of feeling better, getting inspired, and I, basically my story, when I started this, I thought I was doing okay, but then, what you don't know, you're missing. I didn't, without working out, I put on about 10 pounds of muscle. That's what got me my attention, and my joint pain, attention span, and sleep all improved. And I think some of you here who have actually been doing the diet might be able to chime in here in a little bit. But that inspired me, and so I delved into this further to see what this was all about. So there's some key things to understand about it. If you get online, in fact, I have a slide, maybe I took it out, this one. So you're not going to be able to read this, but this is to remind me, risks of the ketogenic diet. 2.1, it says death. There have been 2 reported cases of sudden death in children on the ketogenic diet, and it talks about that probably due to selenium deficiency causing heart failure. Constipation, that's a little less severe. Kidney stones. This is when we sort of modern times we adapt. We try to adapt to a diet and we go too fanatically, or we're not really respecting the way that it should be done. And of course the Eskimos inherently knew this. That's why when you consume whole foods, usually you're going to be okay. They'd also store, because they were on the ocean, a lot of the seafood, they were getting a lot of sodium and salt. But these kids, just a side note, the selenium deficiency, you'd have these parents with kids with glucose metabolism disorders, they're genetic conditions, or maybe diabetes type 1, or epilepsy is another big one where they use the ketogenic diet. And as you get this advice, well, you need X amount of fat and no carbs, and start giving these kids, oils and coconut oil and all these things, and the diet was very simplistic and very deficient. And so the point is you just need to be educating yourself and understanding how to, we still have the nutritional needs of trace minerals and multivitamins, and it has to come through the diet. This really should be a high vegetable diet, by the way. We're talking net carbs, and that means fiber is good for you, and you eat lots of vegetables. You're just not eating a lot of starchy foods and starchy vegetables. And again, the risk of dieting, these are those try and fail methods. Basically, you're working against the system when you're just calorie restriction and you're not reducing carbohydrate intake. Your fat will be locked in. Usually they're frequent eating, lots of water, and really what you're losing is a lot of water and muscle weight right off the bat, and then not burning fat, so it doesn't last very long. So what we're going to offer, also we're kicking off a support series. It's going to be a 30-day keto diet support thing. We've got some handouts about that. Some of you I've worked with already doing this will be able to test. If you're not a patient of mine, we're going to offer a little bit of a break. There's some insurance options too if you have that, but we're going to, actually I'll introduce Libby now so I can stop talking.
Oh.
So Libby's come to join us in our practice, my practice, and she's a nutritionist and provides a little more of the nuts and bolts about how do we implement this. So we'll be having her as a part of that, and you can do individual consults with her. And is there anything you wanted to say or add?
Nope, I was just gonna say that if you don't know what nutritional therapy is or what a therapist does, nutritional therapy is a therapeutic approach using specifically tailored diets to treat or prevent medical diseases and their symptoms. As a therapist, my job is to work with you one-on-one to transform those diets to fit your daily needs so that you're successful in your health journey. So my job is to just be with you one-on-one, any kind of support that you need. So I'm excited to be here with Dr. Graves. We've just kind of started working together, but I've been in this field for over 10 years. So I'm hoping that with the two of us, we can offer a lot of insight for you guys.
In this Keto 30-Day Challenge, just some basics, and then the handout talks more about it. But if you're already a patient of mine, you probably don't have to do number 1 unless you've not had any assessments in a while. And I can't spell assessment for some reason. Assessment. So there's at least one of those consults, assessment, and then the nutritional consults will be once a week. Ketone and glucose testing once a week. We'll have weekly meal plans. And then we'll probably have a couple of group meetings. So this doesn't count as one of those. We'll do one halfway through and then at the end. There's also who's on the Facebook Keto Club where nothing's being posted very much right now? Okay, a couple of you. So that will be an option to get back in there and we can have some discussions going on. The year before, I did some teaching and cooking classes and I taped them all. Better or worse, they're all on YouTube, and we'll get you connected to that information too if you just want to watch me goofing off in my kitchen with my kids, my son. All right, let's open up some questions, and then we've got some samples of ketones, we have some fat bombs, and we have decaf organic Swiss water coffee over there that I hope I put up okay. Yes?
So for people who exercise, carbs are the energy, is everything that